All right, hello everyone. We're back on schedule for UFC Fight Night, Taira versus Park. Now, there was a little bit of a shuffle with the main event. A couple other fights got added, but it's mainly the same card. A lot of actually good fights on the main card. It's a pretty underrated Apex event. We got two in a row before we head back to UFC 319 in Chicago, but for this event, let's get right into it. All right, starting off at strawweight, we got Pierre Rodriguez taking on Ketlin Souza. Pierre Rodriguez sitting at minus 220. Comeback on Souza is plus 185. And the reason these odds are mainly this wide is probably because of the wrestling advantage Rodriguez is going to have in this fight. I think it's going to be a pretty large one, to be honest. She's taken down a lot of women in this division. She's shown she has power on the feet, and that might just be enough to get this done. There has been some cardio concerns in the past, but she looks like she has cleaned those up. Had a really good performance her last time out as a pretty big underdog, and I think she could definitely get it done here. Now, Susan and Roman has a lot of power in this division. Came in against Yasmin Howergy as plus 400, I think, and knocked her down, and then submitted her out cold. So there's definitely going to be chances for Ketlin Souza to land that power, but I think if Rodriguez plays this smart, uses her wrestling, doesn't try to force it, but does use the wrestling in this fight, she should be good. There's a reason these odds are the way they are, and I kind of disagree with. I don't think they should be this wide. I do understand Rodriguez being the favorite. I gotta go Rodriguez due to the wrestling advantage and have her getting it done by decision here. All right, moving on to flyweight, we got Rafael Estevam taking on Felipe Bunes. Estevam sitting at minus 460. Bunes, the comeback is plus 360. My bad. And when you look at these odds, you might think, oh, wow, this guy's Estevam, this guy must be a finisher. This guy must be dangerous. Or Bunes might be a can. And neither of those are true, to be honest with you. Estevam hasn't really proved he can get finishes this level. This guy, he is a good wrestler. And, he can be a good grappler with the okay striking, but this guy's cardio after the second round, he does fall off a cliff, and he's going to have to be careful against a guy like Bunes, who is very dangerous off his back. So, despite Bunes having like pretty not great takedown defense, I do think he definitely can like cause some scrambles. He definitely is going to be live in this fight because Estevam is just mainly a wrestler, and the UFC, at least it's always seen, and that is cause for concern against a guy who does have a very active guard. So I am obviously going to pick Estevam. The dude is good, right? He has been in these situations, these scrambles before, and he has faced off against some pretty decent level competition already and looked okay doing it. But like I said, this guy's almost been finished twice in the third round. The cardio does fall off a cliff, and if Bunes can last the first two rounds, and we can see what happens because he's very live in this fight. All right, next fight at featherweight, one of the newer fights added, actually the newest fight added, got added a couple days ago. Bashi was really supposed to fight Francis Marshall. Marshall pulled out, I believe, with a rib injury, and now we get a short notice John Yanis taking on Austin Bashi, the prospect. Bashi sitting at minus 700, biggest favorite on the card by far. Coming back on Giannis is plus 500. I think the reason these odds are the way they are is because Bashi will have a humongous grappling and wrestling advantage in this fight. He will. And I think off of that first professional loss, he's definitely going to want to wrestle a little bit more. Definitely needs to get this win against a short notice guy. He should dominate. Giannis, if you watch his tape, he's beat a couple UFC guys, or he fought a couple UFC guys. He beat one. He beat Nicky Gary, lost to Cameron Smotherman by decision. But this guy is just mainly a striker. He does have knockout power, but there isn't, in terms of the wrestling, there's not really a lot to offer, right? Not dangerous at all on the ground. No danger whatsoever. No submission wins in his professional career. And he has been submitted a couple times professionally. So there obviously is some pretty major gaps on the ground. He definitely can't strike. And if Bashi does want to hang around for too long on the feet, there definitely could be some moments of success for Giannis, but I got to imagine that Bashi is going to want to get this fight to the ground as quick as possible. The dude has accolades outside the UFC for grappling. I think he can definitely shine in this moment. That's why he's minus 700. That's why this matchup is being made. Give me Austin Bashi here. Get it done by submission. Pretty confident in that. All right, next fight of the card at middleweight, we got Nick Klein taking on Andrei Pulev. Both looking for their first UFC win. Pulev coming in minus 150. Coming back on Klein is plus 130. And be honest, I'm not really crazy high on both these guys. They both haven't found a lot of success at the UFC level. Both didn't really face that high level guys on the Contender Series. And obviously, they won those fights. They won both those fights pretty dominantly, but there was a clear kind of difference in those fights that Pulev was facing a literal punching bag. I mean, that dude would just stand right in front of you. He eat everything. He had a chin, but And there's a reason he was a big favorite against Christian Leroy Duncan in his debut, and it showed. Right, he looked horrible, to be honest with you. And while Nick Klein also got finished in his UFC debut, he did have Master Abdul Malik on ice skates. He did show up for that fight on short notice as a huge underdog and was able to kind of have some moments of success here. While I don't think Klein should strike in this fight, right? Because the striking defense is not good at all. He will be open to those kicks that Pulev throws. So I think his goal is gonna kind of be to get this fight to the ground as quick as possible. I think he could have success doing that because Pulev. When I look at that Contender Series fight, I see a lot of poor wrestling defense in that fight, and now his takedown defense in the UFC is good. Um, in the Contender Series, it just wasn't good. He was piecing the dude up and still getting taken down, still getting controlled, and I got to imagine that Klein will be able to have some success in the wrestling if he chooses to use it. I think he will. I hope he does. But I think he will have success when he uses it, and he is very dangerous to finisher on the ground. I got to go Klein here, get it done by submission. Not crazy confident. I'm not really high on either of these guys, like I said, but I think Klein is a bit more of a finisher than Pulev, as I got to go him by submission here. All right, moving on to the next middleweight fight. We got Rodolfo Vieira taking on Tresean Gore. Vieira sitting at minus 200. Come back on Gore is plus 170. I think these odds are pretty correct for how I think this fight's going to go, right? Vieira, even at his kind of advanced age, right? He's fought, he grappled in BJJ for a really long time, been in combat sports almost forever, it feels like. If you don't know his accolades outside of the UFC, I highly encourage you to go see them. It's really tremendous what this guy has accomplished in the BJJ world, but this guy is a freak athlete. Even at 35, this guy can literally just hop on your back. And this is middleweights we're talking about here, but it is impressive. And this guy is, he is durable still, 35, still durable, still can take a punch and still can definitely grapple. And I think that's going to be the problem for Gore because Gore, while does have power in the hands, he does kind of want to get to the wrestling. That is his main goal, is to get the wrestling. And I don't think he's going to get to the wrestling and have much success or even get the guillotine that he wants in this fight because, right, he's got a nasty guillotine, but I don't think he's going to get in his Vieira. The guys he's submitting with that guillotine, not very high level guys on the ground. I think with Vieira, it's going to be a highly unlikely that they can get that submission on him. And I think just once it hits the ground, there's going to be a huge disadvantage for Gore. Even in the striking, I think Vieira can hold his own here. Gore's a little bit gun shy on the feet. And I just got to think Vieira is going to pretty much outclass this guy everywhere. So I got to take Vieira. Again, minus 200 makes sense because he is a little bit older, but I think he gets this one done by submission here. All right, next fight, featured prelim at bantamweight. We got Rinya Nakamura taking on Nathan Fletcher. Nakamura sitting at minus 400, come back on Fletcher's plus 300. And, it was very disappointing to watch Nakamura's last fight. I think everyone was kind of disappointed. He was a pretty highly touted prospect coming in as a big favorite against Wayne Gafarov. And he just didn't use his wrestling, and that's what he's known for, right? You look at the Tabology page, and there he is in a singlet, and he just wasn't wrestling, right? He was trying to strike with this guy who was clearly a better striker than him, and it wasn't working. Obviously, he got knocked down, he got hurt a bunch, and he didn't start wrestling until the third round. And it's a major issue. That's a major hole in his game, is the fight IQ, right? Because we've seen this guy time and time again have success with the wrestling. This guy can wrestle anyone in this division, and he just chooses not to use the wrestling, which is a big problem. And, against a guy like Fletcher, maybe he can have success on the feet, but this guy does need to rely on his wrestling if he wants to progress up to the UFC. Now, with all that said, I do think this loss is going to kind of recenter him. Hopefully, he gets his mindset where, like, okay, yeah, I got to wrestle more. I got to choose my path of least resistance to get this victory. And I think he can definitely get it done against Fletcher, who showed the holes in the wrestling in his last fight against Callum Loughran. So, as a huge favorite himself. So, I got to pick Rinya Nakamura here to get it done. He just has the better skills. You got to pick the better skilled fighter in most of these fights. I think he gets it done by decision. All right, moving on. We got to fight the featherweight division. Danny Silva taking on Kevin Vallejos. Kevin Vallejos sitting at minus 400. Come back on Silva's plus 300. And I see a lot of people sleeping on Danny Silva this week, right? And spoiler, I'm not going to pick him, but this guy is a very underrated fighter, right? He's probably the more well-rounded fighter of the two, right? He does have the wrestling and the grappling to go to if maybe the striking isn't necessarily going his way. But this dude's a pretty underrated boxer. He has a really high output over 3 rounds, and he's able to maintain it, right? His cardio isn't bad. Apologies. He's able to maintain that striking rhythm over 3 rounds. Now, the problem with Silva in this fight, especially, is going to be the defense because this guy does get hit a ton on the feet, right? You look at his stats, it says upwards of 7 significant strikes landed per minute. And that's a problem when you're facing a guy like Vallejos, who has that one punch knockout power, who has the speed, who has the accuracy, everything is going to be lining up with Vallejos in the striking. That's going to be a problem, like I said, for Silva, who hasn't shown the greatest striking defense. While being the more rounded fighter, that's a big problem in a mostly striking matchup here. So I got to think Vallejos is gonna work this guy on the feet a little bit. It could get interesting maybe first couple rounds, but I think Vallejos will start to pull away as the fight goes on. Definitely with the damage, with the power. And I think Silva's tough enough to ride this out to a decision. So I got Vallejos by decision, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to find that chin, score a knockout. Also, just FYI, there is a little bit of a rumor going on, started by Vallejos himself, I believe, about Silva potentially not being able to make the 145 weight limit, and it has happened before, right? Danny Silva has missed weight in the past, but I think I'm gonna assess this with the assumption that Silva will make the weight. Obviously, if he doesn't, I will probably post his shorts or something, kind of explaining how he looks. Maybe he just didn't try to make the weight. Maybe he tried to make the weight and looks absolutely drained. We'll see. He is a big guy for featherweight, so yeah, we'll see how that turns out. But I gotta go Vallejos by decision here. All right, next fight at welterweight, we got Neil Magny taking on Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Zaleski's sitting at minus 200 right now. Come back on Magny's plus 170. And there's two main things that are going to lean in the direction of Magny here. And then one of them is obviously, you see this statistically, is the reach and the height, right? Because this guy does use his reach and height pretty well when grappling, especially in the clinch. He will kind of grab on the head, kind of hang his weight on you, kind of make you not gas out, but you'll lose your cardio a little bit quicker. This guy does kind of snatch up those long guy submissions and scrambles on the ground. So you definitely got to be careful of him when scrambling. But I think Zaleski should be good. And two is the experience and the strength of schedule, because while they're both pretty much the same age, I think Magny turns 38 the day after this event. I mean, the strength of schedule is just not even close, right? You see the guys Neil Magny's fighting: Mike Malott, top prospect; uh, Michael Morales, probably the best prospect at welterweight, now the number 7 ranked contender; Carlos Prates, probably the most powerful striker in this division. And that's a murderer's row of fighters. And with that does come durability, issues, because he has been knocked out twice in a year. And obviously, going into a fight with a power puncher like Zaleski, it's a problem, because if that chin doesn't hold up, you're probably going to get knocked out early. And I think that is what's going to happen here, right? Magny has shown he can be pressured, a bit later on in his career. Again, Zaleski doesn't really have the speed he used to, but he definitely does still have the power. He can shut anyone's lights out in this division. I definitely think that's going to be an issue for Magny. Especially like I said, the durability issues are definitely there. So, I got to go Zaleski here to get it done by knockout, early knockout probably. But I'm not loving minus 200 on him because, the stats show, he is old as well. He has been slowing down. He also got knocked out in his last fight. So, we'll see how it plays out. This line should be closer to even odds in my opinion, but I do think Zaleski is going to pull it off, able to finish Neil Magny here. All right, next fight at bantamweight, ranked fight at bantamweight. We got Carol Hossa taking on Nora Cornell. Carol Hossa sitting at minus 180. Come back on Cornell. It's plus 155. And I think the reason people are siding with Carosa here, despite her opening as a huge favorite, the line kind of shifted back to the other side, but it's come back to Hosa, is mainly because of the experience gap. You see in the stats, right, a ton more experience for Kara Hosa, despite being 5 years younger, right? She has fought, the top 10 of bantamweight for a really long time now. Not really too many finishes, but she has been in some wars with girls that are in the top 10 of bantamweight. She has fought the best of bantamweight. So obviously there is going to be that experience edge. And if there is someone to kind of push it in the next gear, try to find the way to win this fight, it probably will be Hosa. But I'll tell you one thing. I do like Nora Cornell as a fighter, right? She has the power. She has, the more well-rounded game, in my opinion, right? She can wrestle and, find submissions despite being mainly a striker. We saw that in her last fight where she was on the wrestling and found the finish on the ground, which is always good to see a fighter kind of, broadening their horizon a little bit. The weight misses do concern me. She missed weight twice, I believe. And, there's not really a featherweight anymore. So you kind of got to make bantamweight or you can't compete in the UFC. So I think she will kind of tighten it up. In terms of on the scale. I think in the cage, she has, more paths to victory, in my opinion. She has more power on the feet. She has a more willingness to go to the wrestling. And we saw Carol Host in her last fight kind of struggle with the takedowns, from Eileen Perez. So I gotta think Nora Cornell's gonna be more eager to try to get this fight to the ground, and I think that's just gonna win her this fight here. I think the power advantage and that is just gonna be too much for Carol Hosa to kind of take in this 3 round fight. So give me Nora Cornell here. Not crazy confident in it because the weight misses, and she has hasn't really made the weight too much at 135. But I gotta do think she'll get this done, assuming she makes weight, get it done by decision. All right, moving on to the feature fight in lightweight. A really good fight here. We got Els Brenner taking on Esteban Ribovics. Esteban Ribovic sitting at minus 250. Comeback on Brenner is sitting at plus 210. And honestly, this is one of the fights where I think the odds should be wider, in my opinion, right? Despite Ribovic's kind of fighting some of these close fights sometimes, he is, a finisher in this weight class. And I think that could be a little bit of a concern for Brenner because he gets hit a ton. He is known for his durability, right? He's got an insane chin, but, the chin can only last if you've ever got knocked out his last fight. He got hurt bad the fight before. So, I got to imagine that chin is going to fade at some point, and that's just not a guy you want to. The Rebic just isn't a guy you want to fight with, taking that much damage every single fight. And the thing about Brenner is he's kind of abandoned his, more well-rounded game plan to just kind of have fun in there, and it's entertaining to me. I love watching Elvis Brenner fight. It's not great for his, winning fights, because he has lost 2 in a row, and he's just kind of a striker at this point. Doesn't really use his grappling as much as he should, and he should use it against Ribovics, but I don't think he will. And I think that the power, the speed, the timing of Ribovics is gonna be way too good for Elsbrenner. I think he can hurt Elsbrenner maybe even early in this fight. I think he can take him out here. So give me Ribovics. I thought he was robbed in his last fight too, which is against another really high level guy in Hack Perez. But give me Ribovics here. I think it's a bounce back spot for him. I think it's done by knockout here. All right, another fight in which the odds are a little bit closer than I expected. We got Mateusz Rambesky taking on Chris Duncan in our co-main event. Mateusz Rambesky sitting at or minus 200. Apologize. Come back on Duncan is plus 170, and I just think it's a pretty simple breakdown. I think Rambesky has a lot more ways to win this fight than Duncan. Duncan, he does have the guillotine, and he does have that really solid chin, but he has been dropped before, right? He has been dropped multiple times. He has been hurt a lot. And that's a problem against Rambesky because, pardon me, Rambesky does have, he's got one punch power and he's got wrestling too. He's got really high level wrestling in his back pocket. And I say back pocket, but that is normally his main goal is to try to get to the wrestling, set up those big shots, and then use it to find a takedown. And, I think both can have success against Duncan. I think he can have success on the feet and on the ground. This guy does throw with a ton of power on the feet. He's knocked down, I believe, his last 2 opponents. And that's both trouble for Duncan because you can't, again, like I said in the last breakdown, can't rely on your chin forever to take some of these punches. And, if you're fighting a guy with this much power, you can only take so much damage. And that can be an issue against Rambesky. I think as soon as the fight hits the ground, there's going to be an advantage for Rambesky too. Duncan, while he isn't a bum on the ground, right, he has 2 submission wins in a row, in fact. I think there is going to be levels on the ground, right? Rybesky is a finisher as well on the ground, has great ground and pound and submissions. And again, like I said, I think you have success for both. So while I'm not saying Duncan has no path to victory here, there is some, right? He can, tough this stuff out, and Rybesky does slow down as the fight goes on. So maybe look for Duncan round 3 if he's still hanging in there. Rybesky is starting to slow down, but I do like Rybesky here to get this one done. Very confident. I think he gets done by knockout here. All right, we're moving on to the main event of the evening, the new main event of the evening. We got Tatsuro Taira taking on Hyung Sung Park, not Amir Albazi. Amir Albazi was initially supposed to fight Tatsuro Taira, but he pulled out about a few days ago, I believe. They kind of scrambled to get something going. There was rumors of Waldo Cortez Acosta being on the main event, which is like I don't want to see that right now. But luckily, they were able to pull Hyung Sung Park from his fight next week against Steve Ursig, and now he's here to fight a 5-round main event against Tatsuro Taira. And what comes with that is a lot of, circumstantial issues for Hyung Sung Park because you got to cut your training camp in half. You got to you make that weight cut earlier, preparing for a completely different style of an opponent. Irseg is kind of a striking first type of guy. Now you got a guy that wants to wrestle, wants to grapple with you, and he hasn't really fought a high level grappler like Taira before. Despite being a high level grappler himself, he's kind of running through these guys at 125. He hasn't fought a guy like Taira, and that's going to be an issue because maybe this fight does get extended, and that's the cardio is going to be a concern because again, he's making this on short notice. Wasn't initially supposed to fight 5 rounds, and it's just going to be an issue for him because we've never seen Young Sung Park in 5 rounds, and he may look great. He may go out and have cardio for 5 rounds, but I don't think he will, in my opinion, right? Because all these circumstantial issues, they do add up as a professional, and when you prepare for something and you get something else, that guy can tend to go pretty quickly. And against a guy like Tyra, who despite being younger, and I messed up on these graphics. They both should be on the other side, but Tyra has fought those 5 round fights before against some of the best in the world, against guys like Alex Perez, Brandon Royval. He's been there, done that. Despite only being 25, he has that experience against these high level guys. And I think, his experience, his grappling, and his overall more well rounded approach, he is kind of cleaning up the striking. He kind of got outstruck by Brandon Royval, but that is a different beast on the feet. I do think he can kind of weather this potential early storm here by Park and get his grappling and wrestling going later in the fight. So give me Tyra. He's shown he can hang all 5 rounds. I got him by late submission here. And that is the breakdown. Again, I apologize for the somewhat later recording. Some of my early recordings kind of got messed up, but I am hoping to kind of get some of these out on Mondays and Tuesdays now. Again, there's a lot of mix-ups with this fight card. Hopefully, next week's fight card is a little bit better. There's starting to get odds and start to piece together those fights for next week. So we'll definitely see when the time comes. Probably around Monday or Tuesday. I'm also trying to do recap videos on these type of fight cards. So maybe we'll see that on Sunday or Monday. But I really do appreciate you guys watching. Love y'all. Make sure to like and subscribe and all that stuff. And hopefully we can kind of grow our community together. Really appreciate all you guys for coming along. Y'all, the